He had 7 seconds. 7 seconds before the man with the knife pressed it against her throat. 7 seconds before his daughter in the back seat saw something she could never unsee. 7 seconds before Ethan Cross had to decide whether the quiet life he had spent 4 years carefully building was worth more than the woman trapped in that parking garage. A woman in a wheelchair who had nowhere left to run. He had spent years trying to forget what he was. Tonight, he remembered. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now settle in. This one goes deep. The parking garage beneath Meridian Tower smelled the way all underground garages smell, like motor oil, concrete dust, and the particular kind of loneliness that collects in spaces where nobody lingers. It was a Wednesday evening in early November, the kind of night that arrives too fast and stays too cold, and Ethan Cross was doing what he did every Wednesday. He was late picking up Lily from her after-school program, and he was annoyed at himself about it. "Daddy, you forgot again," Lily said from the back seat. She was 8 years old and had her mother's way of stating a fact without making it sound like an accusation, which somehow made it worse. "I didn't forget," Ethan said. "I was held up. Mrs. Patterson waited with me for 20 minutes. I know, baby. I'll call her. She said you could text. I'll text her." Lily was quiet for a moment. She had her backpack in her lap, and her coat zipped all the way to her chin, even though the car heater had been running for 10 minutes. She ran cold, like her mother had. Ethan noticed things like that. The small physical inheritances, the gestures and habits that surfaced without warning. He noticed them, and he filed them away, and he did not talk about them. "Can we get soup?" Lily asked. "We've got soup at home." "The canned kind." "The canned kind is soup." "It's not the same, and you know it." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the side window with an expression of resigned patience that no 8-year-old should have perfected so thoroughly. He felt the familiar pull of guilt, not sharp, just constant, like a stone he carried in his chest. "We'll stop at the place on Clement Street," he said. She turned toward him. "The one with the bread on the side?" "Yeah." "Okay." She faced forward again, satisfied. "Thank you, Daddy." The Meridian Tower garage had 4 levels. Ethan was on level 3, circling toward the exit ramp when he saw it. His eyes caught the movement before his brain processed what it was. That was training, not instinct, not heroism, just years of discipline that had rewired the way his nervous system organized information. Movement in the peripheral. A figure pressed against the far wall near the emergency exit stairwell. Multiple bodies clustered around it. He slowed the truck. "Why are we stopping?" Lily asked. "Hold on a second." He pulled into an empty space and cut the engine. In the relative quiet, he could hear it now. Not clearly, but enough. A woman's voice, elevated, controlled, but strained. The sound of someone working hard to stay calm. And underneath it, male voices, lower, with that particular cadence that Ethan recognized from a dozen different countries and a dozen different contexts, men who thought they had already won. He looked at the scene across the garage. The woman was in a wheelchair. That detail registered with a specific, ugly weight. She had positioned herself with her back to the wall, smart, instinctive, but the wall was also a trap. The emergency door beside her was one of those that only opened from the stairwell side. He could see from here that there was no exterior handle. She had nowhere to go. There were 4 men. Young, somewhere between 20 and 30. 2 of them were standing with their arms loose and their chins up in that posture that announces itself as theatrical menace. One was leaning against a nearby concrete pillar. The 4th, the one who had Ethan's full attention, was standing directly in front of the woman, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to look at him. Ethan's brain ran through the variables in about 3 seconds. Distance, 60 yards. Terrain, open concrete with 2 support pillars offering partial cover. Exits. The ramp he'd just come from, the emergency stairwell door the woman was trapped against, and a service corridor door on the far wall that was probably locked. Threat level, uncertain, but trending toward serious. The man nearest the woman had his right hand in his jacket pocket. That meant either nothing, or it meant something Ethan could not ignore. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was different now. She had seen it too. Not the details, but the shape of it. 8 years old is old enough to know when something is wrong. "Listen to me." He turned to face her and kept his voice level. "I need you to stay in this truck. Keep the doors locked. Do you have my phone?" She shook her head. He handed her his phone, unlocked. "You're going to call 911. Tell them there's a disturbance in the parking garage of Meridian Tower on Fulton Street, level 3. Can you remember that?" "Meridian Tower, Fulton Street, level 3, she repeated. "Good girl." "Daddy, doors locked, okay?" She looked at him with those eyes, her mother's eyes, dark brown and serious, and she nodded. She was afraid, but she nodded. He thought not for the first time that she was stronger than he gave her credit for. He got out of the truck. Yeah. Across the garage, Victoria Sterling was doing the math. She did this, ran calculations, the same way she ran meetings. Quickly, methodically, without letting the emotion behind the numbers show on her face. It was a professional skill she had developed over years of sitting in boardrooms where being the youngest person and the only woman meant that any display of uncertainty would be cataloged and used against her. She had learned to keep her expression neutral while her mind worked at speed. The math was not good. There were 4 of them. She recognized the one closest to her, Marcus Teal, a former project manager she had terminated from Sterling Dynamics 8 months ago after an internal audit revealed he had been falsifying contractor invoices. The termination had been handled through HR and legal, clean, and documented, the way these things were supposed to be handled. She had not expected to see him again. She especially had not expected to see him here with 3 of his friends, in a parking garage she used 3 times a week. "You really thought there weren't going to be consequences," Marcus said. He was smiling, but it was the smile of a man reciting a script he had rehearsed. "You signed my termination letter. You." "I signed it because you committed fraud against the company," Victoria said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of how steady it was. "That's documented. If you're angry about the outcome, your dispute is with the legal process, not with me personally. Everything about this is personal." Marcus. She was careful with his name, specific, not dismissive. "You're making a decision right now that you cannot take back. These 3 men are making it with you. I'd like you to think carefully about what comes next. You don't get to run this conversation. I'm not trying to run it. I'm trying to help you avoid something catastrophic." His smile dropped. She had seen this before too. The moment when a man who wanted to feel powerful realized that the person he was threatening was not afraid of him. It made him more dangerous, not less. She knew that. She kept her hands visible on the wheels of her chair, fingers loose, and she held his eyes. She could not run. That was the immovable fact at the center of all her calculations. 18 months ago, she could have turned and walked away from this conversation. Walked, or run, or taken the stairs 2 at a time the way she used to when she was in a hurry. The accident had taken that. The accident had taken a lot of things. But Victoria Sterling had spent the last year learning, in ways she had not anticipated, exactly what remained. What remained was her mind, her voice, her ability to read a room and find the seam in it. She was looking for the seam when she heard footsteps. Ethan walked at a normal pace. This was important. Running would signal panic, and panic was contagious and unpredictable. He walked with his hands visible and his shoulders relaxed and his eyes on the group, and he crossed 60 yards of concrete in about 30 seconds. And during those 30 seconds, he had a complete internal argument with himself about what he was doing and why. He was not supposed to be this person anymore. He had made a decision, 4 years ago, standing in a cemetery in the rain while Lily held his hand and didn't cry because she was 4 years old and didn't fully understand what they were burying. He had made a decision to be different, to be smaller, to take up less space in the world and put all of that saved space into one small girl who needed a father, not a soldier. He had done that. He had done it deliberately and with some success. He had a job that didn't require him to be exceptional. He had a quiet apartment in a neighborhood where nobody asked too many questions. He had figured out how to cook 7 different dinners that Lily would actually eat, and he had learned the names of her teachers and her friends' parents. And on the weekends, they went to the farmer's market, and he carried the bags, and she chose the produce, and it was, by any reasonable measure, a good life. He was doing fine. He kept walking. Hey. His voice was calm. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. Everything okay here? All four men turned to look at him. Victoria looked at him. He was used to that assessment, the quick visual inventory people ran when they first saw him. He was not a large man in the obvious way, not the kind of broad-shouldered physical type that announced itself on sight. He was lean, medium height, wearing a jacket that had seen better days and work boots with dried concrete on the toes. His face was ordinary, the kind of face that didn't photograph well and didn't hold attention in a crowd. He looked like exactly what he was on paper, a construction consultant in his late 30s coming off a long shift. Marcus looked him over and arrived at a conclusion. Ethan could see the conclusion being reached. It was fine. He preferred it that way. This is a private conversation, Marcus said. Sure. Ethan stopped about 12 feet away. I just wanted to make sure everybody was all right. Ma'am, are you all right? Victoria looked at him directly. Her eyes were sharp and assessing in a way that reminded him briefly of people he had worked with, people who gathered information fast and used it well. I'm managing, she said. You should walk away, the man leaning against the pillar said. I will, Ethan said pleasantly. Just give me a second. He was looking at Marcus's jacket pocket. The right hand was still in there. That was the detail he could not let go of. Everything else about the situation was negotiable. That one detail was not. She fired me, Marcus said, apparently deciding that explanation was warranted, cost me my career, my reputation, sent lawyers after me. And now she's standing here, sitting here, like nothing happened. That sounds like a real rough situation, Ethan said. Have you talked to a lawyer about it? Marcus blinked. What? If you think the termination was wrongful, you have legal options. Employment attorneys take cases like this on contingency sometimes, so you might not need money up front. That's probably a better path than whatever this is. The man by the pillar laughed, short and derisive. You hear this guy? I'm serious, Ethan said. He was. This path ends badly for everybody here. You, your friends, her. I'd like to help it end better if I can. Marcus pulled his hand from his jacket pocket. There was nothing in it. Ethan registered that and filed it away and kept his expression exactly the same. You don't know what you're walking into, Marcus said, and his voice had shifted. It had gotten quieter, which was usually worse. Probably not, Ethan agreed, but I'm going to stay until I know she's okay. That's not negotiable. Something happened in the space between them, a recalibration. Ethan had seen it before. There was a particular moment in a confrontation where the person pressing forward sensed something in the person opposite them that didn't match their expectations, and they had to decide whether to proceed or reassess. Marcus was in that moment. His three companions felt it too. The man by the pillar straightened slightly. The two flanking men exchanged a glance. You want to be a hero, Marcus said. No, Ethan said. I want to get home and feed my kids soup, but here we are. But what happened next took less than 90 seconds. Ethan didn't throw a punch. He didn't need to. What he did was more difficult to explain and less satisfying to describe. It was the careful application of presence, positioning, and the very specific kind of steadiness that communicates to the threat assessment part of the human brain that the person standing across from you has been in worse situations than this one and is not afraid. He moved. Not toward Marcus, but around him. Just slightly, putting himself between Marcus and Victoria without making the move look deliberate. He changed the geometry of the situation. He spoke quietly and specifically to one of the flanking men, the younger-looking of the two, who had been watching the exit ramp with increasing frequency. You've been looking at that ramp since I walked up, Ethan said to him. That's your way out. You should take it. The young man stared at him. I'm not threatening you, Ethan said. I'm telling you that police are on their way, and the choices you make in the next 2 minutes are going to follow you. Use the ramp. The young man left. That quickly. He just turned and walked away, his footsteps quick and echoing up the ramp. And that departure, that single defection, changed the weight of the whole scene. The man by the pillar pushed off it and straightened, looking at Marcus. The other flanking man took a step back. Marcus looked at Ethan with something that was half anger and half a kind of bewildered reassessment. Who are you? Nobody, Ethan said. I'm nobody. Go home, Marcus. The name, his own name said with complete calm, seemed to land differently than anything else had. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then, with the particular dignity of a man who needs to believe he is choosing to leave, he turned and walked toward the exit ramp. The two remaining men followed. The garage went quiet. Victoria let out a breath. It was the first one she had fully exhaled in about 10 minutes, and she was aware of how much her shoulders ached from holding herself rigid against the wall. That was... She stopped, started again. How did you know his name? You said it when you were talking to him, Ethan said. You were buying time. You were good at it. She studied him. He was standing a few feet away with his hands in his jacket pockets now, and he looked absurdly, slightly embarrassed, like a man who had done something he wasn't supposed to and wasn't sure how to account for it. You heard us talking from the other side of the garage, she said. Sound carries in concrete spaces. You walked over here alone, with no weapon, against 4 of them. The one who left was the real variable. Once he made the decision, the others were going to follow. People usually do. Victoria was quiet for a moment. She was a person who had spent years in rooms full of people trying to impress her, with money, with credentials, with the specific performance of confidence that powerful people put on for each other. She could read it. She was good at reading it. This man was not performing anything. Thank you, she said. It came out simply because she meant it simply, which was not how she usually spoke. He nodded once. Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. He seemed to accept this. He looked toward the far end of the garage where the sound of sirens was beginning to filter down from street level. I called the police, he said. My daughter did. She's in the truck over there. Victoria followed his gaze. Across the garage, in a parked truck, she could see a small shape in the back seat. A child's silhouette pressed against the window, watching. Something about that image, the child watching her father from across a garage, trusting him to come back, hit Victoria in a way she hadn't expected. Your daughter, she said. Lily, she's 8. He said it the way parents say things about their kids, factual on the surface, with a whole separate layer of meaning underneath. She must have been terrified. She made the call, he said. She did her job. There was something in his voice when he said it, not pride exactly, or not only pride. Something more complicated, like he was still getting used to the fact that his 8-year-old was capable of being terrified and functional at the same time. Victoria understood that particular feeling better than she expected. The sirens were closer now. Ethan was already pulling out a card from his jacket. Not his own card, she realized, but a folded piece of paper with a number on it. My number. If the police need a witness statement from me later, I'll probably need to talk to them tonight. He paused. Are you going to be okay while we wait? Victoria looked at him. I manage a company with 400 employees, she said. I'll manage a parking garage. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the small movement at the corner of his mouth that happens when something lands correctly. Yeah, he said. I figured. He walked back to his truck and he stayed there, leaning against it in the cold, while the police came down the ramp with their lights turning the concrete walls red and blue. Victoria could see him in the distance. Lily's window rolling down, the girl leaning out, her father saying something to her. She watched the child throw both arms around his neck. She watched him close his eyes. Victoria Sterling had spent the last 14 months rebuilding her life around things she could measure and control. Balance sheets and recovery timelines and the precise mechanical effort required to do things she used to do without thinking. She had gotten very good at not thinking about what she had lost. But watching Ethan Cross hold his daughter in a parking garage while police tape went up around her, Victoria thought about what it meant to carry something you couldn't put down. She thought she might understand it better than she had admitted. The night was not over. The questions the officers asked were thorough, and she answered all of them. Her assistant came, and then her driver, and the whole machinery of her life reassembled around her the way it always did. But when the car finally pulled out onto Fulton Street, Victoria looked at the piece of paper in her hand, the folded number Ethan had given her, and she held on to it the whole drive home. She wasn't sure why. She told herself it was practical. He was a witness. She might need his statement. She told herself that. The police took 2 hours. That was the part nobody told you about situations like this. The paperwork, the statements, the waiting. Ethan sat in the back of a patrol car with Lily asleep against his arm, her backpack still in her lap, her coat still zipped to the chin, and he answered questions from a detective named Okafor, who had the particular energy of a man who had been on shift since 6 in the morning and was running on bad coffee and professional obligation. Ethan answered everything clearly and without embellishment. He described what he saw, what he did, what was said. He did not mention his background. Nobody asked. Okafor looked up from his notepad at one point and said, "You weren't worried?" "4 of them. One of you." "I was worried," Ethan said. "I just didn't show it." Okafor wrote something down. "You former military?" "I did some service," Ethan said. "Long time ago." Okafor nodded slowly, the way people did when they understood that a door had been opened only a crack and would not be opened further. He wrote something else down. "We'll be in touch if we need anything else. The woman, Ms. Sterling, she's already given her statement. Her legal team showed up fast." "Good," Ethan said. "You know who she is?" "Not really." Okafor looked at him with a mild expression that suggested he found this answer either refreshing or suspicious and hadn't decided which. "Sterling Dynamics Tech Company. She's worth a lot. There are going to be reporters on this by morning. You want to think about whether you want your name attached." Ethan looked down at Lily. She had shifted in her sleep and her head had dropped further against his arm, and her mouth was open slightly the way it always was when she was deeply under. She was still holding the phone he had given her, her small fingers loose around it. "No reporters," he said. "I figured," Okafor said, and closed his notepad. They got home at 9:30. The soup from Clement Street didn't happen. Lily had fallen back asleep on the drive, and Ethan carried her upstairs and put her to bed, without waking her, shoes and coat and all. Because some nights you made the practical choice, and some nights you made the kind choice, and tonight he didn't have the energy to argue with himself about which was which. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. He stood there for a minute longer than he needed to. Then he went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and ate a bowl of cereal over the sink, because that was what there was. And he looked out the window at the street below, the usual nighttime geography of parked cars and lit windows and the occasional pedestrian moving through the cold. And he tried to feel normal. He didn't quite get there. He picked up his phone and looked at it. No messages. He hadn't expected any. He put it down and rinsed the bowl and went to bed and lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling. And he did what he always did when sleep wouldn't come. He ran through the evening in pieces, examining each one for what he could have done differently. It was a habit from the military that he had never successfully quit, after-action analysis. His therapist, the one he had seen twice 4 years ago and then stopped seeing because it felt like performing sadness for an audience, had called it rumination. Ethan called it the price of making decisions. He fell asleep eventually. He dreamed about nothing he remembered in the morning. Well, Lily remembered everything. This was the thing about Lily. She absorbed situations quietly in the moment and then processed them at her own schedule, which was usually about 12 hours later, always at breakfast, always while eating something she was not particularly interested in eating. The next morning she sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal going cold in front of her and her chin in her hand and said, "The woman in the wheelchair, was she okay?" Ethan was at the stove making coffee. "She was okay." "She looked scared." "She was, a little bit." "Were you scared?" He considered lying. He decided against it, not for any principled reason, just because Lily had a specific expression she wore when she suspected she was being managed, and she was wearing it now. "A little bit," he said. "Yeah." This seemed to satisfy her. She poked at her oatmeal. "You didn't look scared." "You're not supposed to look it. That's kind of the whole thing." "Is that from the Navy?" He set 2 mugs on the counter and turned to look at her. She was watching him with that serious, patient attention she sometimes deployed, the kind that felt like more than 8 years old. He didn't talk about the Navy. This was an established fact of their household, like the rule about no screens at dinner and the agreement that Saturday mornings were for the farmer's market regardless of weather. Lily knew the rule. She wasn't breaking it exactly. She was standing at the edge of it, looking over. "Some of it," he said. She nodded slowly. Then, "Is she going to be okay? The woman?" "I think so." "Will we see her again?" "Probably not, baby." Lily considered this. Then she went back to her oatmeal with the air of someone who has registered a fact they're not sure they agree with but will accept for now. Ethan brought her orange juice and sat across from her and drank his coffee, and they talked about other things. a project at school, a book she was reading, whether it was cold enough that weekend to justify the heavier coats. The morning reassembled itself around them the way mornings did. By the time Ethan dropped her at school and drove to his first job site, it almost felt like a normal day. Almost. Victoria called on a Thursday morning, 4 days after the parking garage. Ethan was on the third floor of a building on the east side of the city, talking to a structural engineer about a load-bearing wall that a previous contractor had apparently decided was optional. He felt his phone vibrate in his pocket and ignored it. It vibrated again. He checked it between sentences and saw an unknown number with a local area code and let it go to voicemail. He listened to the voicemail at lunch, sitting in his truck with a sandwich from the deli on the corner. Mr. Cross, this is Victoria Sterling. You gave me your number last Wednesday well, you were there. I wanted to call earlier, but my week has been complicated. I wanted to thank you properly, and also to return your property. A pause. You left your jacket in the garage. One of the officers held it. I have it. I can messenger it back to you, or this is a strange ask, I realize. If you'd be willing to meet for coffee, I'd like to thank you in person. No obligation. You can just give me an address for the messenger, either way. He called back. He had decided he wouldn't, and then he did, which was a pattern he recognized. She answered on the second ring. Mr. Cross? Just Ethan. Ethan. A brief pause. Thank you for calling back. You have my jacket, he said. I do. It has concrete dust on the right elbow. That's mine then. He heard what might have been a quiet exhale, not quite a laugh, but something adjacent to it. Can I buy you coffee? I mean it about the no obligation. I'd like to thank you properly, and I do better with face-to-face than with phone calls. He looked at his sandwich. He thought about the 14 things he had to do this week that were already behind schedule. He thought about the fact that getting involved with someone else's life, even in the small way of a cup of coffee, was exactly the kind of thing he had spent 4 years training himself not to do. Sure, he said, I can do Saturday morning. Early. How early? 8. Yes, that's fine. There's a place called Hartwell's on Broderick Street. Do you know it? I'll find it. On. Hartwell's turned out to be the kind of coffee shop that had been on the same corner for 30 years and showed it. Mismatched chairs, a counter that had been refinished at least twice, a chalkboard menu with some items that had clearly not been updated since the previous decade. Ethan arrived at 7:50 and got a table near the window, which he chose because it had sight lines to both the entrance and the side street, and then felt briefly annoyed at himself for choosing for that reason. Victoria arrived at 8 on the dot. She came through the door the same way she seemed to do everything, directly, without apology, moving through the space with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned exactly how much room she needed and had stopped waiting for other people to make it. She wore a gray coat and her dark hair was back, and she looked, in the morning light, like a person who had slept less than she wanted to and wasn't going to mention it. She spotted him and came over. He started to stand. Please don't, she said. Not sharply, just matter-of-factly. People do that, and then they're not sure what to do with their hands, and it becomes awkward. He sat back down. Noted. She settled at the table across from him and set a folded jacket on the empty chair beside her. His jacket, clean and folded with a precision that suggested someone else had done the laundering. He noticed that and didn't comment on it. A server came. Victoria ordered black coffee. Ethan ordered the same. You're not going to eat? She asked. I ate before I came. At 8 in the morning. I've been up since 5:30. Is that a habit? It's what happens when you have a kid who's decided that 6 a.m. is a reasonable time to ask questions. Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the real precursor to one. How old? 8. Lily. You mentioned her name last week. She's the one who called the police. She was good about it, he said. The same complication in his voice as before. Pride in something else. Something he didn't have a clean name for. Victoria looked at him steadily. She was, he was realizing, a person who made sustained eye contact in a way that most people didn't. Not aggressively, but with a quality of attention that suggested she was actually listening rather than waiting for her turn to speak. He found it slightly unnerving, which he suspected was its own kind of information. I didn't get to say anything coherent to you that night, she said. The police came, and then my assistant came, and then everything happened very fast. That's usually how it goes. So I want to say it now. She picked up her coffee when it arrived and held it in both hands but didn't drink it yet. What you did, and I want to be clear that I'm not romanticizing it or exaggerating it, what you did took a kind of steadiness that most people don't have. I've been in enough high-pressure situations professionally to recognize when someone has real control over themselves versus when someone is performing control. You were not performing. Ethan looked at his coffee. It wasn't a big deal. It was, she said simply. I'm not asking you to receive a compliment gracefully. I'm just telling you what was true from where I was sitting. She paused, which is always where I'm sitting now, so I tend to notice things from that angle that other people don't. He looked up at her. She met his eyes without any particular emphasis, as if she had said something ordinary. How long? He asked. 14 months. She said it the same way. Direct, without performance. I was in a car accident, spinal cord injury, T10 level, partial function below the waist. I can stand with support for short periods, and my physical therapist has opinions about what I'll eventually recover, but wheelchairs are my primary reality. She tilted her head slightly. You didn't ask about it last week. It wasn't relevant last week. Most people ask, or they very carefully don't ask in a way that's somehow louder than asking. I noticed the wheelchair, he said. It changed the tactical situation. That was what mattered at the time. She looked at him for a moment. Tactical situation, she repeated. He realized slightly too late what that had sounded like. Sorry, that's... No. She shook her head. Don't apologize for it. I liked it. It's the first time anyone's described my wheelchair as a tactical variable rather than a tragedy. She finally drank her coffee. What did you do? Before construction consulting. He had expected the question. He still wasn't ready for it. I was in the Navy. Special operations? He looked at her. Why would you ask that specifically? Because the way you moved across that garage, the way you talked to those men, that wasn't general service training. I've met veterans. I've hired veterans. The way you assessed the situation was different. She set her mug down. You don't have to tell me. Navy SEAL, he said. He said it flatly, the way you say something you've decided to say and don't want to make a thing of. 12 years. I got out 4 years ago. Victoria absorbed this without visible reaction. That, in itself, was notable. Most people responded to that information with a shift in energy, a recalibration of how they were looking at you. Victoria just nodded once, as if a hypothesis had been confirmed. Why construction consulting? She asked. Because it needed doing, and I was qualified. He paused. Because nobody calls you in the middle of the night for a construction emergency. She understood that immediately. He could see that she understood it. You wanted to be somewhere ordinary, she said. I wanted to be somewhere Lily could count on me being. The table was quiet for a moment. Outside, the Saturday morning foot traffic was picking up. People with dogs, people with strollers, a couple of runners going by in the cold, with that particular expression of grim determination that runners wore in November. What happened to her mother? Victoria asked. Then, immediately, that's too personal. You don't have to... She died, Ethan said. 3 years after Lily was born. Heart. Nobody knew anything was wrong. He said this in the way he had learned to say it, efficiently, with the emotion compressed down to something manageable. Lily doesn't remember her well. She was 4. I'm sorry, Victoria said. And unlike the word when most people said it in this context, reflexive, a little helpless. When she said it, it sounded like she actually meant to make contact with the thing she was sorry about. Yeah, he said. They were quiet again. Ethan was aware that he had said more to this woman in 20 minutes than he said to most people in a month. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. Marcus Teal, the man from the garage. He said you cost him his career. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in the set of her shoulders shifted slightly. He was a project manager at Sterling Dynamics. He'd been with the company 4 years. An internal audit found that he'd been falsifying contractor invoices, routing payments to a shell company he'd set up under a cousin's name. Approximately $240,000 over 18 months. She said the number without emphasis. We documented everything, worked with our legal team, reported it appropriately, and terminated his employment. He's facing civil action. He has blamed me personally for every part of that. Were you involved in the original investigation? I signed the termination letter. I wasn't involved until the findings were complete. She looked at him steadily. Is there a part of this where you tell me I should have handled it differently? No, he said. I'm not in a position to tell you how to run your company. People do anyway. I noticed that you didn't run from the problem, he said. That night, you held your ground and you talked to him and you were trying to find a way through it. A lot of people would have panicked. I've had 14 months of practice not panicking about things I can't run from, she said. The words were dry and the delivery was dry, but there was something underneath them that wasn't dry at all. Ethan thought about saying something to that. He decided against it. Some things deserved to be left sitting where they'd been put. The police are likely to charge him, he said instead. Okafor seemed thorough. My legal team is managing it, she paused. I'm more concerned about whether he knows my schedule because he's been following me or because I'm predictable. I use that garage 3 times a week. You should vary your routine, I know. And you should tell your security team, assuming you have one, that the garage is a vulnerability. No attendant in there at that hour, one camera that was positioned to cover the ramp only, and a door that doesn't open from outside. He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sorry, I don't know why I said all that. Because you walked into that garage and your brain cataloged every problem in it, she said quietly. And you can't turn that off. He didn't answer. She was right, and she knew she was right, and he didn't see the value in confirming something that didn't require confirmation. Would you be willing to walk through it with me? She asked. The garage. This week sometime, just to tell me what you see. He looked at her. You have a security team. I have people who are very good at installing cameras and very good at looking intimidating in lobbies. I'm not sure how many of them would have done what you did last Wednesday. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to take a job. I'm asking you to walk through a parking garage and tell me what you see. He should have said no. He had about 5 good reasons to say no, and he was aware of all of them while he was saying, Wednesday morning, I can do 7 a.m. before my first sight. 7 a.m. is very early on a Wednesday. I know. She looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she picked up her coffee. 7 a.m., Wednesday, she said. Wednesday came. Then the Wednesday after that. The thing about Victoria Sterling was that she didn't ask for things she didn't need, and she returned every favor with a precision that suggested she kept careful internal accounts. When Ethan walked through the garage with her the first Wednesday and pointed out the 3 additional cameras that should be installed, the 2 access points that needed keycard readers, and the fact that the emergency door latch could be defeated with a coat hanger, she listened without interrupting and sent a facilities team in the next morning to begin corrections. When he mentioned offhandedly that the gate arm at the entrance gave too much lead time before closing, she had it adjusted by Friday. She did not make a production of any of it. She did not treat his input as charity to be received graciously. She treated it like useful information from a competent source, which was how she apparently treated all information, and which Ethan found, despite himself, deeply comfortable. He started spending more time at Meridian Tower than could be explained by the garage consultation. It was not romantic. He told himself this because it was true, and then kept telling himself because it needed the repetition. Victoria was guarded in the ways that people were guarded when they had been hurt and had rebuilt their lives around the hurt. Structured, purposeful, with a very clear perimeter between her professional self and whatever existed behind it. She didn't invite anything personal. She was warm, in her way, but it was a managed warmth, like a thermostat set to a specific temperature. Ethan understood managed warmth. He practiced it himself. What he did not expect was that she would see through it so quickly or so quietly. It happened on the 3rd Wednesday. He had come by not for any particular reason. He was in the neighborhood, the site he'd been at had wrapped early, and he told himself he was just checking that the new camera installations had been completed correctly. He found Victoria in the lobby, on her way to a meeting, talking on her phone with the concentrated urgency of someone managing a crisis. She saw him. She held up one finger. He waited. He looked at the lobby, the new keycard reader at the inner door, the repositioned front desk that now had a direct sightline to the entrance. Everything he'd recommended had been done. She finished her call and dropped the phone into her lap. The camera above the east pillar, she said immediately. My team put it at 60 degrees, but you said 75. 60 will cover it. You said 75. 60 was more realistic given the column placement. Ethan. She looked at him directly. I can tell when someone is being diplomatic to avoid inconveniencing me. My staff do it constantly. I prefer when you don't. He looked at her for a moment. 75, he said. I'll send them the correct angle. Thank you. She tilted her head. Why are you here? Your site wrapped? Yeah. And you came here. He could have manufactured something. He chose not to. I wanted to check the installations. The installations look fine to you, or you would have led with the camera angle. He stood there. She waited. This was, he was coming to understand, a thing she did. She asked a question, and she waited, without filling the silence, without helping you out of it. I don't know, he said. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, I have another 40 minutes before this meeting. There's decent coffee on the 14th floor, if you want. He did not want to say yes. Yes. Yeah, he said. Okay. The 14th floor had a small kitchen that looked out over the city on the west side, all gray November sky and the geometry of rooftops going to the horizon. Victoria poured coffee with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been navigating the geography of this kitchen for years and handed him a mug without asking how he took it, which was black, which was correct. They stood at the window. It occurred to Ethan that this was the first time he had been in a room with her that wasn't public. A coffee shop, a parking garage, a lobby. This was her space, and the quality of her presence in it was different, less managed. She seemed to breathe slightly differently. Can I ask you something? She said. Her voice had a different quality too. Go ahead. When you left the Navy, was it your choice? He looked out the window. Mostly. What does mostly mean? It means I was done, and the timing aligned with being done. He paused. Lily was born. My wife was... Things were complicated. And then Sarah died, and after that the question of whether to stay or go just resolved itself. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Do you miss it? He considered lying. He was very good at lying about this particular thing because he had done it constantly for 4 years. Parts of it, he said. The clarity, mostly. When you're operating, the problem in front of you is the problem. There's nothing behind it and nothing beside it, just the thing you have to solve. And now there's always something behind it. And beside it and below it, he said. Yeah. She looked at her coffee. I understand that, she said. Before the accident, I ran the company the same way. The problem in front of you is the problem, and then the accident happened, and suddenly, everything had about 9 additional layers underneath it. She paused. I don't mean that as a comparison. They're not the same. They're not the same, he agreed, but I think the thing underneath is probably similar. She looked at him. What do you mean? The thing where you're not sure anymore which version of yourself is the real one. He said it carefully, because it was true, and because he almost never said true things out loud about this. Before or after. Victoria was very still. Outside the window, a cloud shadow moved across the rooftops and then passed. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly it. They stood at the window for a while longer without saying anything else, and the city went on doing what cities did, and the coffee went cold, and Ethan Cross stood in a room with a woman who had somehow, in 3 Wednesdays and 1 Saturday morning, managed to put her finger on the thing he had been carrying for 4 years without giving it a name. He didn't know what to do with that. He was not sure he'd ever learned how to do anything useful with it. But standing there, in the quiet of the 14th floor, with the gray sky outside and the coffee mug warm in his hands, he felt something that he hadn't felt in long enough that it took him a moment to identify it. It felt like being seen. Not the version of himself he showed people. The competent father, the quiet professional, the man who handled things and didn't make a fuss about it. Not that version. The other one. The one that still woke at 3 a.m. and ran through old decisions looking for different outcomes. The one that stood at his daughter's door some nights and watched her sleep because watching her was the only thing that made the wait manageable. He didn't say any of that. He wouldn't have known how to begin. But when Victoria looked back at the window and said, "Same time next week?" in a tone that was deliberately casual and a little too careful to be actually casual, he understood that she felt it too. Whatever this was, this thing that had no good category. Yeah, he said, same time. The same time next week turned into the same time the week after that, and then the week after that, until somewhere around the 6th Wednesday, Ethan stopped pretending he was there to check on security installations and Victoria stopped providing that fiction as a reason for the invitation. It didn't announce itself as a change. That was how these things happened, in Ethan's experience. Not with a moment you could point to later and say, there. That was when it shifted, but with an accumulation of small things that you only understood in retrospect. The way she started leaving the 14th floor kitchen, accessible on Wednesday mornings, when the rest of the floor was locked for a board meeting. The way he started timing his first site visit on Wednesdays so he could swing by Meridian Tower afterward without losing more than 40 minutes of the workday. Small adjustments, nothing declared. What changed between them was harder to name than that. Victoria was not an easy person to know. Ethan had established this somewhere around the third week and continued establishing it every week thereafter. She was precise about what she shared and when she shared it, not secretive exactly, but careful, the way a person was careful when they had learned that being readable came at a cost. She asked more questions than she answered. She had a way of listening that made you feel like every word was being filed and cross-referenced, which would have been unnerving if the attention behind it hadn't felt so entirely genuine. He found himself telling her things. This was the part he couldn't account for. He was not a person who told people things. He had friends, technically, men he had served with, 2 guys from the neighborhood, a woman named Carol, who ran the deli on Clement Street and had known him since Lily was 5. But these were friendships maintained largely through proximity and routine rather than actual disclosure. He was good at being present without being available. He had spent years perfecting it. With Victoria, the technique kept failing. It failed on a Wednesday in late November when she asked him how he slept, and he answered honestly. Badly, usually, with the alarm set for 5:15, and the hours between 2 and 4 typically spent in the specific wakeful limbo that wasn't quite consciousness but wasn't rest either. He had meant to say fine. The word that came out was badly, and from there the conversation went somewhere he hadn't planned. It failed again the following week when she mentioned a physical therapy appointment that had gone poorly, something about a nerve response that wasn't progressing the way her therapist had hoped. And she said it in the flat, controlled tone of someone reporting a quarterly loss. And Ethan said, "That's hard. I'm sorry." And she said, "Yes." And then there was a silence between them that was different from their other silences, denser, something in it that neither of them moved to fill. It failed most completely on the Wednesday, 3 weeks before Christmas, when Ethan arrived to find the 14th floor kitchen empty and the coffee already made. She had started doing this, arriving before him and having it ready, a thing she had never acknowledged and he had never commented on. And Victoria was sitting at the small table by the window, looking at her phone with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the controlled neutrality she deployed in difficult conversations, something rawer than that. He sat down. He poured his coffee. "What happened?" he asked. She looked up. "You can tell." "Yeah." She put the phone face down on the table. "I was reviewed today. Not the company. Me. Personally. My board convened a performance assessment." She said it evenly, but he could hear the fault line underneath. 14 months ago, I was in a car accident. The board has been patient, or what they call patient, which means approximately 18 months of restructured oversight with monthly check-ins that weren't required before the accident. Today they informed me that 2 of the 5 members believe the company would benefit from new executive leadership. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What does that mean in practical terms? It means 2 of 5 is not a majority. It means I'm still CEO. It means the other 3 believe I'm competent to continue leading a company I built from 20 people in a rented office to 400 employees and $900 million in annual revenue. She picked up her coffee and set it down without drinking it. It also means that 2 people who sit in my boardroom every month, who have watched me do this job through a year of physical recovery, have decided that the wheelchair changes the calculus. She said the word wheelchair with the specific care of someone naming a thing that deserved to be named directly. They didn't say that. They said performance metrics and leadership continuity. But I've been in enough rooms to hear what's underneath the language. Who are they? It doesn't matter. It might matter. Not today it doesn't. She looked out the window. The sky was the flat white of pre-snow, and the city below had the compressed, slightly hurried quality it got in December when everyone was trying to finish something before the year ended. I'm telling you this because I trust you, not because I want you to fix it. Ethan held that for a second. Okay, he said. She looked at him. That's it? You said you don't want it fixed, so... Something in her face shifted, a release of tension that had been there since he walked in, and that she'd been managing so smoothly he'd only just now fully seen it. Most people can't do that, she said. Just sit with something. I had a lot of practice sitting with things I couldn't fix. He paused. It's not a skill I'd recommend developing. How did you develop it? He turned his mug between his hands. The window behind her was glazed with December light, and he was aware suddenly of the specific quality of the moment, the quiet, the coffee, the way she was looking at him with that attention she had that always felt like more than the occasion called for. After Sarah died, he said, there was about a year where everything was wrong and none of it was fixable. Wrong isn't even the right word. Off. Everything was off. Like the world had been reassembled slightly incorrectly, and I was the only one who could tell. He stopped. Lily needed me functional, so I figured out how to be functional while carrying the other thing. You separate it out. You put it somewhere internal, and you keep it there, and you do the work. Victoria was very quiet. The problem, he continued, is that it works. It works well enough that you forget you've done it. And then something cracks the compartment open and you realize it's been in there all along, exactly the same as when you put it in. Does that happen? The cracking open? He looked at her. Yeah. She understood what he was telling her. He could see that she understood it, not as a story about grief, but as a map she was reading against her own territory. The accident, she said, I did the same thing. The first 2 months in the hospital, then rehab. You learn to be so focused on the next thing, the next physical benchmark, the next meeting, the next decision, that you don't have to sit in the room with what actually happened to you. She exhaled. I'm very good at not sitting in that room. I know, he said. I recognized it. Is that why you kept coming back on Wednesdays? The question was direct enough that it deserved a direct answer. Partly, he said. What's the other part? He thought about lying. He thought about deflecting, which was a more sophisticated form of the same thing. He did neither. I don't know yet, he said. I'm still working it out. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just briefly, just a few seconds, the same kind of gesture you made with a person when words were either too much or not enough. And then she took it back and picked up her coffee, and the moment reorganized itself around them. Same time next week, she said. Yeah, he said, same time. Zamo. Lily met Victoria on a Saturday that hadn't been planned. Ethan had not planned it because he had been deliberately not planning it, which was its own kind of planning. An active avoidance of the question of whether Lily should meet this woman who had become, without his permission or clear intention, a significant presence in his Wednesdays, and increasingly in the rest of the week as well. They texted, not constantly, but regularly. A question Victoria had about a structural issue at Sterling Dynamics that she thought he might have an opinion on, a photograph Lily had drawn at school that Ethan found himself sending because it was funny and he wanted to show someone, short exchanges that built up over days and weeks into something he couldn't quite categorize. He had not introduced Lily to anyone since Sarah died. Not because he had a rule about it. He didn't have a rule exactly. He just hadn't. He had understood instinctively that Lily had lost one person who mattered, and that the geometry of loss was complicated for a child who was still figuring out what it meant, and he had not wanted to bring anyone into her world who might then leave it. The meeting happened because he was bad at logistics on a particular Saturday in December. He had arranged for Lily to spend the afternoon with Carol from the deli while he dealt with a site emergency. A contractor had made a critical error on a load-bearing calculation, and Ethan's phone had been ringing since 7 a.m. He texted Carol. Carol, it turned out, had a family thing she had forgotten to mention. He called 2 other backup options. One didn't answer, one was out of the city. Lily was standing in the kitchen eating toast and watching him work through the phone calls with the resigned patience of a child who had experienced the operational chaos of a single-parent household before. He stared at his phone. Victoria's name was in his recent contacts. I have a friend, he said. I need to ask if she can watch you for a few hours. Lily looked at him. A friend? Yes. A friend or a work friend? What's the difference? A work friend is someone you talk about problems with. A friend is someone you talk about everything with. She considered him. Which one? Ethan looked at his daughter, 8 years old. I'm calling her, he said. Victoria answered on the second ring. He explained the situation briefly and without preamble. Emergency at a site. Needed someone to stay with Lily for 3 hours maximum. Completely fine if she couldn't. He was working through other options. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Bring her here, Victoria said. I'm working from home today. I have space, and I have snacks, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to. Ethan, bring her. Victoria's apartment was on the 22nd floor of a building 8 blocks from Meridian Tower. It was large by city standards, not ostentatiously large, but with the kind of space that came from years of financial success, combined with a person who had specific ideas about how they needed to live. After the accident, Ethan had learned later, she had renovated the entire space, widened doorways, replaced the kitchen counter heights, rerouted the bathroom entirely. She had done it practically and without sentiment, the same way she did everything, and the result was a home that was entirely functional and also, despite itself, had the particular warmth of a place where someone actually lived rather than just existed. Lily walked in and looked at everything with the open assessment of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't looking. She looked at the bookshelves, floor to ceiling on the south wall, organized in a way that was approximately by subject and approximately by size and not quite either. She looked at the large drafting table near the window, covered in what appeared to be architectural drawings and printed spreadsheets. She looked at Victoria. Victoria looked back. Hi, Lily said. Hi, Victoria said. I'm Victoria. You're Lily. How do you know my name? Your dad talks about you. Lily cut a glance at Ethan, brief and appraising, then back to Victoria. He doesn't usually talk about me to people. Lily, Ethan said, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's unusual. She turned back to Victoria with the particular directness of a child who has not yet been socialized out of asking the obvious question. What happened to your legs? Lily. It's fine, Victoria said. She looked at Lily evenly. I was in a car accident 14 months ago. I hurt my spine. Now I use a wheelchair to get around most of the time. Lily absorbed this. Does it hurt? Not like it did at the beginning. Now it mostly just means some things take more work than they used to. Like what things? Lily, No, it's a fair question. Victoria looked at Lily with something that was not quite amusement but was adjacent to it, a quality of attention that recognized the child was asking because she genuinely wanted to understand, not to be unkind. Getting into cars, stairs, obviously. Some days physical therapy hurts. Reaching things on high shelves is a project. She paused. Although that last one I had problems with before the accident, because I'm not particularly tall. Lily looked at the bookshelves. How do you reach the top ones? Very carefully, with a long-handled gripper tool that I keep in the kitchen and refuse to use where anyone can see me. Lily smiled, a quick, real smile, the one she had that wasn't performed. I have a step stool. Step stools are more dignified. I should get one. Ethan stood in the doorway of this exchange and felt something in his chest do something he didn't have a clean word for. He cleared his throat. I have to go. I'll be back by 3. Victoria looked at him. We'll be fine. I know. He looked at Lily. Behave. I always behave, Lily said, already moving toward the bookshelves. He left. He drove to the site. He dealt with the load-bearing problem and the contractor and 2 phone calls from the project owner and a consultation with a structural engineer that took 40 minutes longer than it should have. And throughout all of it, some background part of his brain was in Victoria's apartment on the 22nd floor, monitoring a situation he had not planned and could not control. He got back at 2:40. Victoria's door was opened by Lily, who had apparently been waiting in the entry area, and who reported the following before he was fully inside. Victoria had the best bookshelves of anyone she had ever met and had let her read the first 3 chapters of a book about deep-sea creatures that had photographs. There were very good crackers in the kitchen, and they had been playing a card game called Rummy that Lily did not know before today, and at which she had lost twice but understood the strategy now. She's smart, Victoria said from across the apartment. She was at the drafting table with her reading glasses on, looking at him over the top of them. She picks up rules fast. She beats me at most games now, Ethan said. She beat me twice at Rummy, for the record, Lily said. I lost by a lot the first time and then by less the second time. I would have won the 3rd game. You would have, Victoria agreed. Lily went to get her coat from the entryway closet, and in the brief moment she was out of the room, Victoria and Ethan were across the apartment from each other, and she was looking at him with an expression he'd seen on her once before. In the parking garage, after everything was over, when she had looked at him and seemed to be cataloging something she couldn't yet classify. She's lovely, Victoria said quietly. You know that, right? Yeah, he said. He said it the way he always said things about Lily, with the feeling compressed underneath. I know. Zaten. The conversation Ethan did not want to have happened on a Tuesday night, not a Wednesday. It happened because Lily had not quite gone to sleep, and he could hear her moving around in her room at 9:15 when the apartment was supposed to be quiet, and when he opened her door she was sitting up in bed with the lamp on and the book about deep-sea creatures. Victoria had pressed it into her arms when they left, saying she had 2 copies and Lily should keep it, open on her lap. You're supposed to be asleep, he said. I know. I'm almost at the end of the anglerfish chapter. Anglerfish? They're the ones with the light on their head. The female is much bigger than the male. Did you know the male actually fuses his body to the female permanently? Like, they just become one creature. That sounds terrible. The book says it's efficient. Can I finish the chapter? He sat on the edge of her bed. She read for a few minutes. He waited. This was a thing he had learned. With Lily, the actual conversation was never the one that started. The actual conversation came after the preliminary one, when she had decided the ground was solid enough. She finished the chapter and put the book down. She looked at him. Do you like Victoria? Yes, he said. She's a good person. I mean, like her. He looked at his daughter, 8 years old, and asking him this with the same calm directness she asked everything. That's a complicated question. It's a yes or no question. Most yes or no questions are more complicated than they look. Lily considered this with the seriousness she gave everything. She talked about you, she said, while you were gone. Not a lot. But she said that when she first met you, she thought you were very calm for someone in a scary situation. She said it like she was still thinking about it. Ethan didn't say anything. I think she likes you, Lily said. Likes you. Not just regular likes. Lily, I'm just telling you what I noticed. She picked at the edge of her blanket. Mama used to say you were bad at noticing things that were right in front of you unless they were dangerous things. She said you could notice danger from miles away, but you were blind to the obvious good stuff. The room went quiet. Ethan felt the specific quality of silence that descended when Sarah came into a conversation. Not painful exactly, not anymore, but weighted, like a change in air pressure. You remember her saying that, he said. I remember some things, Lily said. She said it carefully, like she was protecting something fragile. Not a lot. I remember the way she smelled. I remember she used to hum when she was reading. I remember she said that about you because she said it like it was funny, but she also meant it. Ethan sat very still. She was right, wasn't she? Lily said. He looked at his daughter in the lamplight, her mother's eyes, her mother's patience, her mother's way of cutting directly to the thing. Yeah, he said. She was usually right. Lily nodded slowly. Then she slid down in bed and pulled the blanket up, the way she did when she had decided the conversation was complete. You can turn the light off, she said. He turned the light off. He stood at the door for a moment in the dark. Daddy? Yeah. It's okay. Her voice in the dark was small and clear and entirely certain. If you like her, it's okay. He stood there a moment longer. Get some sleep, baby. He pulled the door almost closed and walked down the hall to the kitchen and stood at the counter in the dark for a long time. And he did not get a glass of water or check his phone or do any of the things he usually did when he was not sleeping. He just stood there and let the thing he had been managing and compartmenting and carefully not examining sit out in the open for a while, the way you sometimes had to let a wound breathe before you could figure out what it needed. He thought about what Lily had said. He thought about the 22nd floor and Victoria's bookshelves, and the way she had talked to his daughter like she was a person whose questions deserved real answers. He thought about Wednesday mornings and cold coffee, and the things she had said about not knowing which version of yourself was the real one. He thought about Sarah, who had been right about him more than he had ever told her. He thought about the way Victoria had put her hand over his on the table, just for a few seconds, just enough to say the thing that didn't have words, and then taken it back and moved on as if it hadn't happened. He thought about how he had held on to that moment for 3 weeks without knowing what to do with it. He was still standing in the dark kitchen when his phone lit up on the counter. A text. Victoria. Lily left her library card. It fell out of her coat pocket. I'll bring it Wednesday. He looked at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back. Thanks. She'll notice it missing before Wednesday. 3 seconds. Then, I could drop it by tomorrow if that's easier. He looked at the message. He thought about what Lily had said. It's okay if you like her, with the absolute confidence of an 8-year-old who had seen something true and named it. He typed. That would be good. I'll be home after 5. Her reply came fast. See you then. He put the phone down. He stood in the dark kitchen. Outside, the city made its nighttime sounds. Distant traffic, the occasional siren, the particular urban quiet that wasn't quiet at all but had its own texture. He thought about the man he had been trying to be for 4 years. Smaller, quieter, taking up less space. Protecting everyone around him by making himself into something manageable and bounded and safe. He thought about Victoria on the 14th floor saying, I'm telling you this because I trust you, not because I want you to fix it. He thought about how that sentence had landed differently than any sentence he could remember in recent years. Not because of what it said about him, but because of what it required of him. Not capability, not protection, not steadiness in a crisis. Just presence, just the willingness to stay in the room with something hard. He had not known, until she said it, how much he had been waiting to be needed for exactly that. He went to bed. He set his alarm for 5:15. He lay in the dark and did not run through the evening looking for what he could have done differently, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. He slept better than he had in weeks. Part 4. Louis? Viết đủ 5 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sàng, có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau, câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dần bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật. Theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự, tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng, nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dừng giữa câu, hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh không mở rộng nội dung. Message collapsed. She came at 5:40. He heard the elevator in the hallway and then the knock, and when he opened the door, Victoria was there in her coat with Lily's library card in her hand, and the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed being casual about something and isn't entirely pulling it off. Library card, she said. Thanks. He took it. Then, because he had decided in the kitchen the night before that he was done pretending the obvious wasn't obvious. Come in. I was making dinner. She looked at him, a beat of assessment. I don't want to interrupt. You're not interrupting. Come in. She came in. The apartment was not impressive. Ethan had never done anything to make it impressive. It was clean in the functional way of a person who had learned that disorder cost you time you didn't have, but it was also clearly a place where a child lived, with Lily's drawings tacked to the refrigerator and her books stacked in various locations that were not bookshelves and a pair of small sneakers parked sideways by the door. Victoria navigated through the entry without comment and followed him to the kitchen, where a pot of something was on the stove that smelled like garlic and tomato. Pasta, he said. There's enough. Ethan, it's pasta. It takes 20 minutes and there's enough. Sit down if you want. She sat at the kitchen table. It was a small table. 4 chairs, but only 2 were ever used, one by Ethan and one by Lily, the other 2 functioning mostly as horizontal storage for mail and Lily's school projects. Victoria moved a permission slip from the chair and set it carefully on top of the nearest pile. He noticed her noticing the apartment, not appraisingly, just taking it in, the way she took everything in. "Where's Lily?" she asked. "Shower. She'll be out in 10 minutes or 45, depending on whether she decides to conduct one of her experiments." Experiments. She discovered that if you put a drop of food coloring in the water, it makes the whole shower a different color. We went through a period where she was testing every color in the set. He stirred the sauce. "We don't have green food coloring anymore." Victoria laughed. Not the careful, managed version she sometimes deployed in difficult conversations, but a real one, short and surprised and genuine. And it changed her face in a way that he was aware of noticing too specifically. "She's something," Victoria said. Yeah, he kept his eyes on the stove. "She liked you." "I liked her." A pause. "She asked me while you were gone whether I got lonely." He turned. "She asked you that?" "She asked me if I got lonely living by myself because she said her dad got lonely sometimes even though he didn't say so, and she wanted to know if other people who lived by themselves felt the same way." Victoria looked at him with an expression that was several things at once. She said it very matter-of-factly, like she was conducting research. Ethan turned back to the stove. He didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm sorry, she doesn't have a filter for—" "Don't apologize for it." Her voice was quiet. "She was right, for the record. I do get lonely." I told her yes. He turned the heat down on the sauce. He stood there with his back to her for a moment, and in the small kitchen with the garlic smell and the sounds of the building around them, he felt the specific vulnerability of being known. Not the version of himself he managed and presented, but the actual version, the one that got lonely in a quiet apartment and slept badly and carried things in compartments, and had never told anyone except that apparently his 8-year-old daughter had told a woman he was still figuring out what to do with. "She's perceptive," he said finally. "Gets it from her mother." Was Sarah perceptive? He was quiet for a moment. People rarely said Sarah's name. He had not told many people her name. "Yes," he said. "She had this way of seeing past whatever you were doing on the surface. It was inconvenient, mostly. You couldn't be bad at something around her without her knowing it and deciding whether to call you on it or let it go." "Did she usually call you on it?" "Depended on whether she thought it was fixable." He paused. "She called me on most things." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "She sounds like someone worth missing." "Yeah," he said, "she was." The shower shut off down the hall. There was a long pause, which suggested the food coloring question was being considered, and then footsteps. And then Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, in pajamas, with her hair wet and her eyes going immediately to Victoria, with an expression of genuine, uncomplicated pleasure. "You're here," she said. "I brought your library card," Victoria said. "Your dad said I could stay for dinner." Lily looked at Ethan. He kept his face neutral. She turned back to Victoria. "He made pasta with the good sauce. He only makes the good sauce when someone important is coming over." "Lily," Ethan said, "I'm just saying there's a correlation." She came into the kitchen and climbed into her usual chair. "Do you like pasta?" "I do," Victoria said. "Do you have any food things, like allergies or whatever?" "No allergies." "Good. He puts mushrooms in the sauce, so I just wanted to check because Nadia from my class is allergic to mushrooms, and she told me it's very serious." She arranged herself at the table with the businesslike efficiency of a child settling in for an important meal. "She carries a special pen." "That's an EpiPen," Ethan said. "It's for severe allergic reactions." "I know what it is, Dad." Ethan put 3 bowls on the table. He had not planned this. The 3 bowls, the table with someone new at it, the particular shape of an evening that included more people than it usually did. And he was aware of the strangeness of it, and also aware that it did not feel as strange as it should have. Lily was talking, the way she talked when she was comfortable. Not anxiously or performatively, just the natural running commentary of a child who found the world interesting and saw no reason not to share that. She told Victoria about the anglerfish. She asked Victoria about the drawings on her drafting table, which led to a 10-minute explanation of how Sterling Dynamics was developing a new assistive technology platform, which Victoria explained in terms that were simultaneously accurate and accessible to an 8-year-old, which Ethan noted without commenting on. He watched his daughter with this woman, and he felt the thing in his chest that he'd been not examining for months do something that was no longer avoidable. I was in trouble. Not the dangerous kind, the other kind. The kind that arrived without warning in the form of a person who fit into your kitchen like they had always been there. After dinner, Lily decided that Victoria needed to see her room. This was not a request so much as a declaration, delivered with the certainty of someone who had not yet learned that invitations required acceptance rather than assumption. Victoria followed, and Ethan cleaned up the kitchen and listened to the muffled conversation from down the hall. Lily's voice doing most of the talking, and Victoria's voice asking questions, and the occasional silence that suggested something was being examined or explained. He was still at the sink when they came back. Victoria had a look on her face that he had seen once before, in the parking garage, that quality of having encountered something she hadn't expected and was still processing. "She has a photograph," Victoria said, "on her desk." He knew which one. "Her mother," he said. "She told me." A pause. "She told me she talks to the photograph sometimes, not like she thinks it can hear her, but because it helps her remember what her mother's face looked like when she was happy." Ethan set the last dish in the rack. He dried his hands, he stood there with the dish towel, and he looked at the wall for a moment because that was easier than turning around. "She told you that," he said. "She said she thought it was something I might understand. Talking to something that can't talk back." Victoria's voice was careful and even, the way it was when she was moving through something that required steadiness. "She said her dad does it too, just not with the photograph. She said you do it when you're working on things. When you're at a job site and something goes wrong, you sometimes say Sarah's name quietly, like checking in." He turned around. He looked at Victoria. He had never told anyone that. He had not been aware that Lily knew it. "She pays attention," he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. "She loves you very much," Victoria said, "and she's worried about you." "She doesn't need to worry about me." "Ethan." Her voice was quiet and direct. "She's 8 years old and she's been managing around your grief for years because she doesn't want to make it harder for you. She told me her mom would want you to be happy. She said it like she'd been holding it for a while." The kitchen was very quiet. Down the hall, Lily's door clicked shut. She had gone to bed without being asked, which meant she had understood something about the shape of the evening and was giving them room. That too was more than she should have had to know how to do. Ethan sat down at the kitchen table. He sat down because his legs felt suddenly like they had been doing something load-bearing that he hadn't noticed, and stopping was necessary. Victoria came to the table and sat across from him. She didn't say anything. She did what she had taught him she was capable of doing. She sat in the room with the hard thing without trying to move it. "She's right," he said. It came out flat and tired and true. "About the grief. I handled it the only way I knew how, which was to compress it into something I could carry without dropping anything else. And that, it works. It has worked. Lily is okay. She's more than okay. She's extraordinary. And the job is fine. Everything is technically fine." He put his hands on the table. He looked at them. "But I've been carrying a dead person in a box inside me for 4 years, he said, "and I have been so focused on making sure nobody else could see the box that I forgot it was there. And then you—" He stopped. Victoria waited. "You asked me once how I developed the ability to sit with unfixable things," he said. "The real answer is that I became unfixable myself. Somewhere after Sarah died, I decided that people who let themselves be loved were just setting themselves up to lose something, and that losing something hurt too much to risk again. And I told myself it was for Lily. I told myself I was protecting her, but I was protecting myself." Victoria was looking at him with those eyes, the full attention of her, nothing held back. "I know," she said quietly. "You know." "I've been doing the same thing." She said it without any performance of difficulty. "Since the accident, I built the recovery into a project because projects are manageable and grief isn't. I took every board meeting and every physical therapy benchmark and every operational decision, and I stacked them up between myself and the thing that actually happened, which is that one night a car ran a red light and I lost the person I used to be. Not Sarah, I know it's not the same. It doesn't have to be the same to matter," he said. She stopped. She looked at him. "The thing underneath is the same," he said. "You told me that. On the 14th floor. Not knowing which version of yourself is real anymore. Before or after. You remembered. I remember everything you say." He said it simply, without decoration, because it was simply true and he was done managing it. That's part of the problem. The silence between them was different from all their previous silences. Not comfortable, not exactly, more like the silence before a decision, when all the variables have been assessed and the only thing remaining is the choice. I don't know how to do this, he said. Whatever this is, I have been specifically not doing it for 4 years, and I got good at not doing it. I know, she said. I've watched you not doing it for 3 months. You've been not doing it too. I have. She paused. I'm better at pretending I have reasons. My situation, the company, the timing, those aren't reasons? They're real things, she said. They're not reasons. She looked at her hands. I'm scared, Ethan. I want to be clear about that. I don't come into this uncomplicated. I have a company that 2 board members would like to take from me. I have a body that doesn't work the way it used to and requires more management than I would like. And I have spent 14 months becoming very self-sufficient in ways that don't leave a lot of room for someone else. I'm not an easy situation. I'm a widowed veteran with PTSD and an 8-year-old who asks strangers if they get lonely, he said. I'm not making a case for easy either. She looked up at him. The almost smile was there, more real this time, and under it something more uncertain and more genuine than the managed warmth she usually showed. What do you want? She asked. Not what you think you should want. What do you actually want? He looked at her. He thought about the box he'd been carrying. He thought about Lily's voice in the dark. It's okay if you like her. It's okay. With the certainty of someone who had been waiting for permission to be given that he hadn't known he needed. I want to stop carrying it alone, he said. That's the most honest answer I've got. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then, that's enough, she said. For now. That's enough. They did not talk about what it meant in any formal way that night. He walked her to the elevator at 8:30, and she squeezed his arm once at the door in the way that meant something without requiring words. And then she was gone, and he stood in the hallway for a moment and breathed. What followed was not a transformation. He wanted to be clear about that, at least in his own account of it, clear in the way he was always clear about operations, about what actually happened versus what the report made it sound like. There was no single conversation that fixed anything. There were a series of evenings that accumulated into something, and a series of mornings that felt incrementally less like carrying a weight alone, and a series of ordinary interactions that would have been unremarkable in a different life, but in this one felt like something being slowly rebuilt. Victoria came to dinner on a Thursday the following week. Lily had requested it with the directness she applied to all important agenda items, presenting the case to Ethan over breakfast. Victoria was interesting and had good bookshelves and understood the structural principles of deep-sea creatures and didn't treat Lily like she was younger than she was, and therefore she should come to dinner again. Ethan called this a compelling argument. Lily said she knew. Victoria came. They ate the pasta again because Lily had requested that too. After dinner, Victoria helped with the dishes, which Ethan protested and then stopped protesting because she found the rhythm of it quickly, and it seemed to be something she wanted to do rather than a gesture. And there was something in the ordinary geometry of it. 2 people at a kitchen sink, the sounds of the apartment, Lily at the table working on a drawing. That felt like a test of something, and it was passing. The drawing took Lily an hour. When it was done, she carried it to the table where they had moved with their coffee, and she set it down in front of Victoria. It's for you, she said. Victoria looked at it. Ethan looked at it from across the table. It was the kind of drawing that an 8-year-old makes. Not technically accomplished, but immediately legible in the way children's art often was, with a clarity of intention that professional artists spent years trying to recover. 3 figures, rendered in Lily's careful crayon hand. The tallest on the left, a man, dark-haired, with serious eyes. A small figure in the middle, a child, with what was unmistakably a long braid. And on the right, a woman with dark hair, seated, with 2 wheels at her sides drawn in careful parallel circles. Behind all 3 of them, a wash of yellow and orange and pink. A sunrise or a sunset. It was impossible to tell which, and maybe that was the point. Above it, in Lily's large, deliberate printing, U.S. The word took up a quarter of the paper. Victoria stared at it. Ethan watched her stare at it. Lily, he said carefully. You don't have to keep it, Lily told Victoria quickly. I just wanted to make you something, because you don't have any kids' drawings, and I think every house should have at least one. She paused. Mrs. Patterson says art is how people say things they don't have words for. Victoria had not said anything. This was unusual. Ethan had never seen her without words. She was looking at the drawing with an expression he had not seen on her face before, something open and unguarded and slightly undone in a way that the rest of her was not. And he understood with the particular precision of someone who had been watching her carefully for months, that this had gotten through the armor in a way that nothing else had. "I'll keep it," Victoria said. Her voice was slightly different, not thicker exactly, but like something in it had shifted register. "Thank you, Lily." Lily nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose project has succeeded. "It goes in a good place," she said. "Not a drawer, a good place where you can see it." "I know just the place," Victoria said. After Lily went to bed, actually to bed this time, almost on schedule, with the self-possessed grace of a child who understood she had done what she came to do, Victoria sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the drawing in front of her, and she did not say anything for a long time. Ethan sat across from her and let the silence be what it was. "She said us," Victoria said finally. "Yeah. She drew us as a family. She drew what she sees," he said. "She doesn't have the adult habit of second-guessing what she sees." Victoria looked at the drawing, then she looked at him. "Are you all right with what she sees?" He thought about the 4 years. He thought about the box. He thought about the question Victoria had asked him the night of the library card. Not what he thought he should want, but what he actually wanted. And the answer he had given, which was true and which he had not taken back. "I'm getting there," he said. "That's the honest answer. I'm not all the way there, but I'm closer than I was." He paused. "Are you?" She looked at him for a moment. "Closer than I was," she said. It was enough. For that night, it was enough. The board crisis came in January. It came the way organizational crises usually came, not as the obvious dramatic event, but as a series of smaller pressures that had been building for longer than anyone admitted, and that finally broke into the open at the worst possible time. The two dissenting board members, whose names Ethan had eventually learned were Hargrove and Chin, a retired tech executive and a venture partner respectively, had spent the months since their performance assessment quietly building a case. They had gone to 3 of Sterling Dynamics' larger institutional investors. They had suggested, in the careful language of people who understood liability, that the company's Q4 numbers, solid but not exceptional, reflected a leadership uncertainty that the market was beginning to price in. Ethan heard about it on a Sunday morning. Victoria called him at 7 a.m., which she had never done before, and said without preamble, "I need to tell you something." He was already up. He took the call in the kitchen while Lily slept. He listened without interrupting, which was all he could do and which he understood was part of what she needed. Someone to tell it to who would hear it without immediately trying to organize it into solutions. She told him the full shape of it. Hargrove and Chin were calling for a special board meeting to discuss executive leadership. They had enough institutional investor support to force the meeting if the 3 remaining board members didn't consent to it directly. Victoria's legal team was prepared. Her 3 supporting board members were aligned. But prepared and aligned were not the same as certain, and she knew it, and she was talking to him at 7 a.m. on a Sunday because the certainty was the part she didn't have and couldn't manufacture. "What do Hargrove and Chin actually want?" he asked when she finished. "Not what they're saying. What do they want?" She was quiet for a moment. "Control," she said. "Hargrove wants to install a CEO he knows. There's a name he's been circulating. Someone from his previous company. Chin follows Hargrove. They've decided that the accident created an opening and they're using it. So it's not about performance." "It was never about performance." "Then the performance data is your weapon," he said. "Not a defense. A weapon. You don't respond to the implied question about your capacity. You make them answer for why they want to replace someone whose company has grown 22% over a period that included a major personal medical event and an economic quarter that hit most of the sector hard." He paused. "What are their portfolios doing compared to yours?" She was quiet. Then, "That's a different way to frame it." "It's the accurate way to frame it. They're not evaluating performance. They're trying to manufacture a justification, make them defend the manufacturer." He heard her breathing on the other end of the line. Not distress, but the specific quality of a person who is very rapidly reorganizing their approach to something. He had seen her do it in person. It was something to witness, the speed of it. "You would have been good at this," she said. "At what?" "Strategy. Not just tactical. The larger picture. Seeing what a situation is actually about." "I spent 12 years doing it," he said. "Different stakes." "Not that different." A pause. "Can you come over today? I need to work through the board meeting framework, and I think better when I'm talking." "I'll bring Lily," he said. "She can read the anglerfish book again." He heard the exhale that was almost a laugh. "Okay," she said. "Come over." He woke Lily at 8 and told her they were going to Victoria's. Lily got dressed in 7 minutes, which was a record, and ate her breakfast with the focused efficiency of someone who has places to be. In the car, she was quiet for a block and then said, "Is Victoria okay?" "She's dealing with something at work. We're going to help." "How do we help with work things?" "She thinks better when she's not alone, so we show up." Lily considered this from the back seat. "That's a good kind of help," she said. "Not doing it for someone, just being there." "Yeah," Ethan said. "That's right." "Mama used to say that to you," Lily said. "I remember that. She said, 'I'm not here to fix it. I'm just here.'" He gripped the steering wheel. The winter morning light was coming through the windshield and the city was quiet, and his daughter was in the back seat with her coat zipped up and her hands in her lap, telling him something from a box he'd thought was sealed. "She did say that," he said. His voice held. "I thought of it because of what you just said." Lily looked out the window. "She would have liked Victoria, I think." He drove. The city passed by the windows. He did not trust himself to speak for about a block and a half, but by the time they turned onto Victoria Street, he had put himself back together in the functional way that was the only way he knew, and when he pulled into the parking structure of her building and Lily scrambled out of the back seat with her book already in hand, he was present and steady in the way he had trained himself to be present and steady. It was also, underneath all of it, aware of something that had not been there in 4 years. He was aware of looking forward to where he was going. Not because it was safe, not because it was manageable, not because it required something specific from him that he knew how to provide, but because the woman on the 22nd floor had somehow become the kind of person whose presence made the weight different, not lighter, exactly, but distributed differently, shared in a way that changed what it felt like to carry it. Lily pressed the elevator button and looked up at the floor numbers with the impatience of someone who had a place to be. "Come on," she said, to the elevator in general. "It's coming," Ethan said. "I know. I'm just encouraging it." He looked at his daughter. He thought about Sarah's voice in the dark. "I'm not here to fix it. I'm just here." He thought about what it had taken him 4 years and one unexpected woman to finally understand about what those words meant. The elevator arrived. They got in. The doors closed. Lily pressed 22 with the authority of someone who knew exactly where she was going. And for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, so did Ethan. Victoria's apartment on the 22nd floor had a particular quality on Sunday mornings that was different from any other time Ethan had been there. The city below moved at a slower frequency, fewer horns, fewer sirens, the particular muffled quiet of a January morning when the cold kept people inside. And the light that came through the west-facing windows was thin and flat and honest in the way that winter light was, showing everything without flattery. She had the drafting table cleared when they arrived. This was notable because the drafting table was never cleared. It was her working surface, perpetually layered with documents and drawings and the annotated printouts she used to think through problems. The fact that it was cleared meant she had been up for a while, moving things, preparing, getting ready to work. Lily went immediately to the bookshelves. This had become, in the 3 times she had been here, her established routine. She went to the shelves the way other people went to a familiar chair, with the comfort of someone returning to a known place. Victoria had started leaving the deep-sea creature book on the lowest shelf where Lily could reach it without asking. "The blue couch," Victoria told her, meaning that was where she should settle. Lily took the book and went without argument, which told Ethan something about how comfortable she had become here in a short time. Victoria looked at Ethan. She looked tired, not the tired of someone who hadn't slept, but the deeper tired of someone who had been running high-level tension for too long and was feeling the metabolic cost of it. There were things in her face that her professional composure usually kept smoothed out, and they were visible this morning in a way that he was aware of noticing carefully, not because it weakened her, but because it made her more real, more specifically herself. "Coffee's made," she said. Sit down, he said. I'll get it. She looked at him for a moment. The brief assessment she did when someone offered to do something in her space, checking whether it was a gesture or whether it was genuine. Then she went to the table and sat. He found the mugs. He found the coffee. He poured and brought 2 cups to the table and sat across from her and said, "Walk me through the board meeting, everything you know." She did. She was precise and organized, even tired, laying out the structure of it the way she laid out everything. The relevant facts first, then the variables, then the risks she could identify. Hargrove had called the special meeting for the following Friday. The 3 supporting board members, Carson, Way, and Mira Aldis, who had been with Sterling Dynamics since the beginning, were prepared to hold. But Hargrove had been working the institutional investors for weeks, and if he had moved more than 40% of the voting shares to his position before Friday's meeting, the math would shift. "What's his number right now?" Ethan asked. "My legal team thinks 31%, maybe 33. And he needs 40 to force a leadership change over the board majority's objection? 42, under our current charter structure. Then he's 9 points short with 5 days. Which is enough time if he has conversations I'm not aware of." Ethan thought about this. He turned his mug between his hands. Who are the institutional investors who haven't committed? 3 of the larger ones. Pembroke Capital, a fund called Meridian Growth Partners, unrelated to the building, and a family office out of Seattle called Cassidy Holdings. Combined, they hold about 18% of the voting shares. Have you talked to them directly? Not through counsel, not through your IR team, you directly. Victoria paused. Not recently. We have scheduled quarterly check-ins. Call them this week, he said. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Not to lobby them, just to talk. Tell them where the company is. Tell them about the Q4 numbers and what they mean in context and what the next 12 months look like. Don't mention Hargrove. Don't make it about the board fight. Make it about the company you built and where it's going. She was looking at him with that expression she got when something had reoriented her thinking. Not agreement necessarily, but the quality of a mind receiving new information and running it fast. "You think the fight is making me look reactive," she said. "I think if those 3 investors hear from Hargrove that leadership is uncertain, and then they hear from you fighting that claim, both messages reinforce the idea that there's a problem. But if they hear from you talking about the company with full confidence and no mention of any conflict, then Hargrove is trying to manufacture a crisis that the CEO doesn't even acknowledge exists," she said, "because she's too busy running the company." Yeah. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her coffee. He watched the processing happen in real time, the reorientation, the new angle, the rapid reconstruction of her approach around it. "That's good," she said quietly, not as a compliment to him, but as an assessment of the strategy. "That's actually very good." "You would have gotten there," he said. "Maybe. Later. When I was less tired." She looked at him across the table. "You came here because you knew I needed to think out loud. I came here because you called me at 7 a.m., and you don't do that unless it matters." She held his gaze. There was something in the directness of the moment, the morning light, the quiet apartment, Lily's occasional page-turning audible from the couch, that felt different from the careful managed exchanges they had been having for months. Less managed, more actual. "I trust you," she said. It came out simply, which he understood was not simple for her. "I know," he said. "I trust you too." It was not a declaration of anything beyond what it was, and what it was turned out to be enough, or the beginning of enough. She called Pembroke Capital on Monday morning. She called Meridian Growth Partners on Tuesday. She called Cassidy Holdings Wednesday afternoon, and the call ran 40 minutes instead of the scheduled 15, because James Cassidy, the aging patriarch of the family office, had a question about the assistive technology platform that Sterling Dynamics had been developing, and that question opened into a conversation about the company's direction that Victoria said afterward felt more like a genuine dialogue than any investor call she'd had in 2 years. Ethan heard about all 3 calls in the evenings, brief texts, sometimes a call when Lily was in bed. He didn't offer strategic input after that Sunday because she didn't need it. What he offered was the thing she had said she didn't want him to fix, but that she clearly needed on some level. The presence of someone who was paying attention and would still be there at the end of the day, regardless of outcome. He understood that kind of support now in a way he hadn't before. He'd been on the receiving end of it once, from Sarah, and he had taken it for granted with the confident blindness of someone who assumed the things that sustained them would simply continue. He had spent 4 years since then sustaining everyone else: Lily, the job, the household, the small ecosystem of obligation that constituted a single parent's life, and telling himself that not needing sustaining was a form of strength. He had been wrong about that. He could see that clearly now, in the way you could sometimes only see things after the angle changed. The board meeting was Friday morning at 9. Victoria texted him at 8:50. "Going in. I'll call you after." I was on a job site in the east end of the city, overseeing a structural assessment that required exactly enough concentration to keep the surface of his mind occupied while the rest of it sat with the 22nd floor and what was happening there. He did the work. He answered the questions his team needed answered. He checked his phone at intervals that he was aware were too frequent and that he couldn't make himself stop. At 11:40, his phone rang. "It's done," she said. He stepped away from the site toward the edge of the building where there was less ambient noise. What happened? Hargrove had 34%. He needed 42. He was 8 points short, and he knew it before the meeting started. Cassidy Holdings called him Thursday and told him they were not moving their shares. A pause, and in the pause he could hear her breathing, which was slightly different from her normal controlled breath. He withdrew the motion, said he wanted to table discussion of leadership structure until the Q2 review, which is his way of retreating without calling it a retreat. "And your board?" Carson made a motion to reaffirm the current executive structure for the next 2 years. It passed 5-0. Another pause. Hargrove voted yes. He had no choice, but he voted yes. Ethan stood at the edge of the construction site with the January wind coming off the bay and his phone against his ear. "Good," he said. "That's it? Good? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something slightly more celebratory." "You built a company from 20 people to 400, he said. "You did that before the accident, and you kept doing it after. You made 3 phone calls this week to people who needed to be reminded of that, and they were reminded. The board meeting was the last 5 minutes of something you'd already won." He paused. "Good is accurate." She was quiet for a moment, and then she laughed. Not the short, surprised version, but a longer one, with the full weight of the morning releasing behind it, and it was the best sound he had heard in a long time, maybe longer than he could precisely account for. "Come to dinner Friday," she said. "Bring Lily. I'll cook." "You cook?" "I cook. I'm not going to tell you I'm exceptional at it, but I can produce dinner." "Lily has opinions about dinner." "I know Lily's opinions about dinner. She outlined them to me the last time she was here. I have notes." He looked out at the bay, at the flat gray water and the opposite shore. He thought about the shape of his Fridays, the job site, the pickup from school, the grocery run that he had never quite gotten efficient at, the particular rhythm of a weekday evening that had been the same for years. "We'll be there at 6, he said. Victoria cooked pasta. Not the same pasta he made. Hers had a different sauce, one with olives and capers, and a brightness that cut through the salt in a way that Lily approved of immediately and said so, which made Victoria set down the spoon she was using and look at the ceiling briefly in the way of someone who had been holding tension for a long time and felt it release. Dinner was loud in the way that dinners with Lily were always loud, not disruptively, but with the particular energy of a child who had a lot to say and a captive audience. She told Victoria about a science project on weather systems. She asked Victoria whether the board meeting had been scary. When Victoria said yes, actually, a little, Lily nodded with the seriousness she brought to important confirmations and said that her dad said being scared wasn't the problem. Not doing the thing anyway was the problem. Victoria looked at Ethan across the table. "Did you say that?" she asked. "Something like it," he said. "It's very good advice." "He says a lot of good things," Lily said. "He just doesn't say them very often, so you have to listen when he does." Ethan pointed at her pasta. She went back to eating. After dinner, after the dishes, they had a rhythm at the sink now, without having negotiated one. After Lily had shown Victoria the chapter of a new book she'd started and had fallen asleep on the blue couch with it open on her chest, the apartment settled into the quiet that happened when the child frequency went offline and the adult world reasserted itself. Ethan lifted Lily and carried her to the guest room that Victoria had begun at some point in the preceding weeks, keeping available on Friday nights. He had not commented on this. He had understood what it meant and allowed it to mean what it meant. He tucked the blanket up to Lily's chin, the way he had been doing for 8 years, and he stood at the door for the usual extra moment, and he felt the same thing he always felt, the massive ordinary fact of her. And then he went back to the main room. Victoria was at the window. The city was lit below in its usual nighttime architecture of windows and streetlights, and the occasional moving headlight tracing the grid. She was holding a glass of water and looking out, and she turned when he came in. "She's asleep," he said. "I know. She went fast." "She always does once she stops moving." He came to the window and stood beside her and looked at the city. "She likes it here." "I know that too." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I like having her here." He looked at her. She was looking at the city still, her profile to him, and the window light made her face something different than it was in other light, softer, or maybe more specific. He had been looking at her face for months, and he was still finding things in it. "Victoria," he said. She turned. He was not good at this. He needed to say that first, if only to himself. Needed to be clear about the fact that what he was about to do was not something he had practiced or prepared, was not strategic, was simply the thing that 4 years of careful protection and 3 months of Wednesdays and one Sunday morning board crisis had moved him to finally stop being afraid of. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something for about 2 months, he said. "And I've decided that trying to figure out how to say it is just a more sophisticated version of not saying it." She was very still. "I love you," he said. "I don't mean it casually. I mean it in the way that I have been carrying it around since about November and refusing to name it because naming it meant it was real, and real things can be lost." He paused. "I'm done not naming it." The window was behind her and the city was behind that, and she was looking at him with the full weight of her attention, the way she always looked at things that mattered. "That took you 2 months, she said. "Give or take." "I've known since the 14th floor, she said. "The first day you told me you remembered everything I said." He looked at her. "You've known for 3 months. Almost 4. And you weren't ready." She said it without accusation, without impatience. "I knew you weren't ready. Pushing someone who isn't ready doesn't make them ready. It just makes them leave." She paused. "I didn't want you to leave." He thought about the woman who had been trapped against a wall in a parking garage and had talked to her attacker with her hands visible and her voice controlled because she had assessed the situation and found the only available tool and used it. He thought about the board meeting and the phone calls and the careful, patient way she moved through the world. Not because the world was easy, but because she had decided that whatever the world threw at her, she was not going to be caught without a strategy. She had been strategically patient with him. He found that he didn't mind. He found that it was, in some way he couldn't fully articulate, one of the most loving things anyone had done for him. "I love you too," she said. "Since we're naming things." He crossed the space between them and she met him halfway, or whatever halfway meant in her specific geography, which was a thing he had learned to understand not as a limitation, but as a different set of coordinates. And when he put his arms around her and she put hers around him, and they stood at the window above the city, it was not graceful or cinematic. It was 2 people holding each other the way people held each other when they had been not doing it for too long, and the relief of it was almost structural. She pressed her face into his shoulder. He felt her exhale. "This is going to be complicated," she said, muffled but clear. "I know," he said. "I have a company and a board and a body that requires Victoria. Significant logistical management, and you have a job and a daughter and what your therapist would probably call unresolved grief. Victoria. I'm just saying it won't be simple." "I know it won't be simple," he said. "I'm not asking for simple." He felt her still slightly. "I'm asking for real. I've had simple. I want real." She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled back enough to look at him, and her face in the window light was the unguarded version. Not the CEO, not the survivor, not the person who had built an architecture of competence around her pain. Just her. "Real is harder," she said. "Yeah," he said, "I know." "You're okay with hard." "I spent 12 years doing hard things before breakfast." Something in her face shifted, the almost smile arriving and staying this time, becoming an actual smile, which was a thing he had not seen from her enough and intended to correct. That's a very Navy SEAL way to frame a relationship, she said. I work with what I have. She laughed. He kissed her. It was not a perfect moment. The couch was behind her, and he misjudged the distance slightly, and she made a noise that was partly laughter and partly surprise, and neither of them was the polished version of themselves. And it was, for exactly that reason, exactly right. There is a version of this story that ends here, at the window above the city, and calls it a conclusion. But real things don't end at their best moments. They continue, carrying the weight of everything that came before and the uncertainty of everything that comes next. And what defines them is not the moments of clarity, but what the people in them choose to do on the ordinary days when there's no crisis to resolve and no enemy to identify and nothing to do but be present and keep choosing. So here's what happened after. Victoria met with her board in February and presented a 5-year strategic plan that Carson called the most coherent document he had seen in 20 years of board work. Hargrove sat through the presentation without speaking and voted to approve. Whether this was capitulation or genuine realignment was something Victoria spent exactly one evening trying to determine, and then set aside as a question that cost more than it was worth. Sterling Dynamics launched a pilot program in March, a partnership with 3 rehabilitation hospitals to develop and distribute assistive technology tools for people adapting to spinal cord injuries and other mobility-affecting conditions. Victoria had been working on the framework since November. She did not announce it publicly as a personal initiative. She announced it as a company priority because that was what it was. Ethan's construction consultancy picked up 2 significant contracts in the first quarter of the new year, the kind of contracts that required him to build his team rather than carry the work himself. He hired 2 people. He learned, imperfectly and with difficulty, to delegate the details and hold the larger shape. He still woke at 5:15. Some habits were structural, but the hours between 2 and 4 were more reliably sleep now, and on the nights they weren't, he had stopped running after-action analyses and started simply acknowledging that he was awake and that it would pass, which it did. He and Lily moved in the fall, not far, 10 blocks, into a building with an elevator and better light, and a second room that was larger than what Lily had before. She arranged it herself, with a seriousness of purpose that suggested she had been designing the room in her head for some time. She put the deep-sea creature book on the primary shelf. She put the photograph of Sarah on her desk, in the same position it had always been. The drawing she had made, the 3 figures, the sunrise, the word US in large letters, had been hanging on Victoria's wall since December, in the place of prominence she had said it deserved, above the drafting table where Victoria could see it from her chair when she worked. It was still there in the fall, still there the winter after that. Ethan thought about what it meant to be a warrior. He had thought about it periodically his whole adult life, in the way that people thought about whatever their foundational self-concept was, examining it, testing it against experience, watching it change shape without quite becoming something else. He had understood it one way at 22, when he went through training and learned what his body and mind could withstand, and what they could push through, and what the outer edge of endurance felt like when you were stupid enough or committed enough to find it. He had understood it another way in the years of operational service, the specific, demanding discipline of a person who had to be exactly right in exactly the moments when being wrong was irreversible. And then his wife died and he came home and he raised his daughter alone, and he understood it a third way, that the hardest discipline was not the kind that required action, but the kind that required stillness. Staying, showing up to the same kitchen and the same school drop-off and the same cereal over the sink at 9 p.m. with the same consistency, day after day, even when the person doing it was running on something close to empty. He had thought that was the final understanding. He had thought the arc stopped there. He had been wrong. There was one more thing that the arc required. The thing he had been specifically avoiding, the thing he had told himself was self-protection, and that turned out to be its opposite. The willingness to be known by someone who was not his daughter. The willingness to let another person see the box he was carrying and not close it up when they reached for it. The willingness to accept being loved, which was harder than any of it, harder than training, harder than operations, harder than grief, because it required something that none of those other things required. It required trust that what he opened himself to would not destroy him when it eventually ended or changed or became something he had not anticipated. And trust, he had learned from Victoria, was not the absence of fear. It was the decision you made anyway. He was bad at it still. He would probably always be somewhat bad at it, would still close off sometimes, would still go quiet when he needed to be loud, would still default to problem solving when what was needed was simply his presence. These were not things that love cured. They were things that love had to keep working around, and that the person doing the loving had to keep deciding was worth the effort. Victoria kept deciding. He kept deciding. On the ordinary days, on the difficult days, on the days when the weight of everything that had come before made the present feel like something borrowed. They kept deciding. Lily had known they would before either of them did. Ethan had thought about this more than once. The drawing on the wall, the word US in a child's hand, the absolute calm certainty with which his daughter had looked at two broken adults and drawn them into a family before they had the courage to do it themselves. He had asked her about it once, on a Sunday morning when they were at the farmer's market, and she was choosing persimmons with the concentration she brought to important decisions. "How did you know?" he said. "When you made that drawing." She looked at him. "Know what?" "That it was going to work out." She considered the persimmon in her hand, set it in the bag. I didn't know it was going to work out," she said. "I just knew that was what I wanted. And Mama used to say if you're not sure what you want, you should draw it. It makes it real." He stood in the farmer's market with the winter produce and the smell of coffee from a cart nearby and his daughter beside him, and he thought about Sarah with her habit of humming while she read, and the things she had understood about him that he was still learning from years after she was gone, and the specific, strange continuity of being known, the way people who had loved you kept teaching you things even when they were no longer there to do it directly. "She was smart," Lily said. "She put another persimmon in the bag. You should get more of these. Victoria likes them." "How do you know Victoria likes persimmons?" "I asked her." Lily moved on to the next stall with the efficiency of someone who has a comprehensive list. "I asked her what her favorite fruits were. I'm keeping track." He followed his daughter through the market in the winter light. He thought about the box he had been carrying for 4 years, and the way it felt different now. Not gone, not sealed, but no longer something he carried alone. Some weight changed in nature when you shared it, not because the weight decreased, but because the act of sharing it changed your relationship to it. That was something he had not understood until Victoria sat across from him in a kitchen on a Tuesday evening and said, "I trust you. Not because I want you to fix it." He had spent his whole life fixing things. He was good at it. He would keep being good at it. But he had learned something that the training never taught, and the service never taught, and grief had taught him only incompletely. That the highest form of strength was not fixing the unfixable. It was staying inside the unfixable thing together and not flinching. Victoria texted at 10:15 while he was carrying the market bags back to the car, and Lily was explaining the optimal conditions for persimmon ripening. He checked it at a red light. "Board package is done. Coming over for lunch?" He looked at the message. He looked at Lily, who was still talking about persimmons with the focus she gave everything important. He thought about the 22nd floor and the bookshelves and the drawing on the wall and the particular quality of an afternoon that included more people than it used to. He texted back one word, "Yes." Then he put his phone away and drove home through the winter streets, and the city went past the windows the way it always did, indifferent and magnificent and full of lives being quietly constructed and quietly survived. And Ethan Cross, who had spent years making himself small enough that loss couldn't find a target, drove toward an apartment that was large enough for the life he was choosing and did not look back. Some things you carry, some things carry you. And some things, the rare and difficult and sustaining ones, you build together, piece by piece, in the ordinary days, until what you have made is something neither of you could have managed alone. That was what home was. Not a place, not a state of arrival, but the daily decision to return to something, to keep returning, to trust that the returning mattered even when the road was hard. Ethan had been a soldier. He had been a widower. He had been a father doing it alone in the specific grinding way that was the only way he knew. Now he was something he hadn't had a name for in 4 years. He was someone who was going home,